To return to Tokyo after even a short time away is to see a very different city. At the end of 1987, this old brick building on the edge of the Nihonbashi area was demolished. This was the Dai building, designed by Kingo Tatsuno, a leading architect of the early 20th century. It was built in 1914 and was the last brick building left in Nihonbashi. Tokyo Station, the gateway to the city. This was also the work of Kingo Tatsuno, and also built in 1914. It is Japan's largest brick building. Once a week, the station holds a musical recital. The high dome of the station rotunda provides fine acoustics. The station building, with its harmony of red brick and white stone, has been called one of the great structures of the Taisho era, from 1912 to 1925. After surviving both the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 and the devastating air raids of World War II, Tokyo Station is now under consideration for possible demolition as part of a plan to rebuild Tokyo's Marunouchi district. Dresden, the third largest city in East Germany. Here, in complete contrast to Tokyo, old buildings are not disappearing, but reappearing. Most of this city was destroyed by the intense bombing of the Allied forces during World War II. But for over 40 years since then, the people of Dresden have worked to restore their city to its pre-war glory. The Semper Opera House, now fully restored. People now can enjoy musical events here as they did long ago. Even today, the scars of war can be found in every corner of the city. Almost all of Dresden's historic buildings date from the reign of the 18th century Elector Augustus II. Restoring this magnificent ornamental work is a painstaking task. The Zwinger Museum was originally built as a palace for the Elector. It was totally destroyed in the wartime bombing, but here we see it in the last stages of restoration.
Ja, wir müssen Anbau B noch drüben machen. Nächstes Jahr auf alle Fälle. Wollen wir fertig werden, ja. Dankeschön. Bitteschön.
Tokyo, a city constantly replacing the old with the new. Dresden, a city determined to restore the old, no matter how much damage it may have suffered. Why are these two cities so different? Shuichi Kato believes it is a question of the way their citizens view their own history.
To restore an entire city to its original condition is a very expensive undertaking. The easier choice is simply to build a new city. Tokyo is an entirely functional commercial metropolis. It changes rapidly in whichever ways are most convenient. When the old wears out, it's replaced with the new. I don't believe the old here is ever rebuilt. In fact, what remains of it is purposely torn down. The old brick buildings of the Marunouchi district were demolished without a moment's apparent hesitation. In Japan, there's little interest in preserving towns or buildings from the past. The concern is with present-day conditions. Japanese culture stresses change rather than continuity. The Japanese live for the present and see things from the perspective of the present. By contrast, in my opinion, Westerners are strongly devoted to historical continuity.
The setting for the 1953 film What Is Your Name was here, in the Tsukibashi district of Tokyo. To appreciate the striking changes in Japan's capital, let's look at Tsukibashi then and now.
君、肝心なこと。君の名は何て？また警報か。さあ、早く帰りたまえ。じゃあ、半年経ったらきっと。それまでお互いに何も知らずにおきましょう。さよなら。気をつけてね。
The Tsukibashi scene in What Is Your Name is today divided between the Ginza and Yurakucho districts. It remains one of Tokyo's liveliest neighborhoods. This huge building, housing a department store and several cinemas, was completed 2 years ago. But let's look even further back into the history of this area.
Edo 時代、ここから先は、江戸城の一角だったわけですね。今マリオになっていますけども、この辺りには枡形の櫓門がありまして、ここから、こういうふうな形で月屋橋が、かかっていました。こちらには大番所といいまして、月屋橋御門を守る、旗本たちが弓や鉄砲というのを常備して、構えていた、そういうところだったんですね。この奥には南町奉行所がありました。南町奉行所は、皆さんご存知だと思うんですけども、大岡越前守とか遠山左衛門の城、それから、鬼の養蔵と言われた鳥居養蔵といったような、そういう人たちが、奉行として、だったわけですね。
Tsukibashi Gate stood at the southeast corner of Edo Castle. 120 years ago, the Minami-machi Magistrate's office stood here, just in front of the gate. Let's trace what happened to Tsukibashi Gate and the Magistrate's office in the years that followed. With the Meiji Restoration in 1868, the Magistrate's office became the property of the Satsuma clan from the island of Kyushu. Tsukibashi Gate was torn down, leaving an empty lot. By 1905, Harumidori Avenue was completed, cutting across the moat. In 1912, on this long-abandoned plot of land, Japan's first taxi company established its office. By 1922, the taxi company's lot had been divided into three smaller sections. On one was a life insurance company, on another stood a small playhouse. After the Great Kanto earthquake the following year, the plot had to be rebuilt. Now it had two life insurance firms and a warehouse. In 1933, the Nichigeki Theatre was built here, joining the Asahi Shimbun newspaper office, completed 2 years earlier. These two buildings were to be Tsukibashi landmarks for many years. This is what the area looked like immediately after World War II. The old stone bridge shown in What Is Your Name was torn down in 1957. From about this time, the Tsukibashi district began to reflect Japan's remarkable post-war economic growth. Tokyo's streetcars were replaced by subway trains. Motorways were built over the city. Tsukibashi became a favorite location for political campaigning. In 1981, the final curtain fell at the Nichigeki Theatre, the favorite of Tokyoites and the nursery of many future stage and screen stars. Tsukibashi has thus been through a number of major changes since the Meiji period. Venice on the Adriatic, a city which today looks much as it did hundreds of years ago. Tokyo was also once famed for its canals. But the two cities have developed in totally opposite ways. The San Marco Plaza, the heart of Venice. Altogether, the city has some 50 plazas. Narrow passageways suddenly open into spacious squares. Many European cities are built around this type of plaza or square. They serve as gathering places for the people of the city. And the plazas of Venice are still used exactly as they always have been. Edo, or Old Tokyo, a bustling city built around rivers and canals. Visiting Europeans called Edo the Venice of the East. This screen painting captures the vitality of Edo life in the early 17th century. people gathering on the bridge, others filling the streets, still others dancing in a religious frenzy. In short, a celebration of spring in a peaceful, pleasant city. All the same, Edo had no open squares where its people could meet. Venice, a city built around plazas. Edo, a city without plazas. Again, why the difference?
街の魅力の一つが広場であるということは、
Venice is not the only city with plazas. Many other cities have them as well. The origin of these public squares probably goes back to the agora, or marketplaces, of the ancient Greek city-states. Here, citizens gathered to talk to one another, to debate politics, or to administer justice. In short, they were a place for all public aspects of life. The tradition of the agora carried on from Greece to Rome through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance into the present day. Of course, today, in the age of the automobile, many public squares in Italy and elsewhere have become a kind of parking lot. These squares no longer carry out their traditional function. But Venice is a city built on water, a city without a single car. Here, the plazas still basically serve their traditional role. People come here to stroll and talk, children come to play. The plaza remains the center of public life. To come to Venice is to see the plaza at its most authentic. The towns and cities of Japan, on the other hand, have nothing comparable to the European public square. The basic reason may be that for people to be able to come and play and talk together in this type of public place, their society must be, to some extent, horizontal. This is not to say it must be democratic. Most of the cities in Italy seldom, if ever, operated on the principle of democracy, but their people had a strong sense of being fundamentally on the same level with one another. In Japan, by contrast, society was strongly vertical in nature. The community was structured around a series of hierarchies, running from top to bottom. The social ties and obligations between family members, for example, outweighed those between members of the same generation. The public square, as we know it, never developed. The key difference was in the nature of the society and the relationships between people.
The Champs-Élysées, Paris. In the 19th century, the city of Paris was rebuilt on an unprecedented scale. From the Arc de Triomphe in the Place de l'Étoile, 12 broad avenues radiate in every direction. The mayor of the city at the time, George Eugène Haussmann, designed the new Paris for order and neatness. It was not enough for the city to be a comfortable place to live. Haussmann thought it should also be a place of beauty. Even the sizes of the windows on buildings facing onto the larger avenues were strictly regulated by law. The height of the buildings was standardized, creating a city that looks harmonious and orderly from any angle. Haussmann's project lived up to its promise. He created a city renowned for its beauty. In 1884, a plan was made to rebuild Tokyo, using Paris as a model. As in Paris, streets would radiate out from a triumphal arch. This is a blueprint of the plan, drawn up by two German architects commissioned by the Meiji government, Hermann Ender and Wilhelm Böckmann. Running through the center of the city would be Japan Avenue. The avenue would start at the Central Railway Station, today's Tokyo Station. Ender and Böckmann also decided that all administrative buildings should be centralized in one location. The Parliament building, still in use today, was built in accordance with this plan. But Japan's economic base was still weak. Only a small portion of this grand plan was ever realized. The Marunouchi district occupies the area between the Imperial Palace and Tokyo Station. This area was built on the basis of Ender and Böckmann's plan. Tokyo Station, 335 meters long and totally symmetrical. In front of the station, a square and a broad, straight avenue were built. For the people of Tokyo, it was the first taste of European city design. Meanwhile, most of Tokyo remains a maze-like warren of streets, filled with an unregulated variety of buildings and houses. Apart from a few areas like Marunouchi, the great majority of Tokyo has never been subjected to any genuine urban planning. This computer image shows the process by which cracks develop, one by one, in a piece of ceramic ware.
例えばここにごくありふれた萩焼きの、湯飲みがあるんですが、この表面に無数の亀裂が入っています。こうやって映像を見ていきますと、次第にこのひびがだんだん道に見えてくる。そうしますとまるで東京の地図を見るような、あるいは空から東京を眺めるような、そういう錯覚に陥る映像だと思います。例えば環状道路があったり、近所のバス道路があったり、公園があったり、そういうふうにだんだん見えてきます。
A map of Tokyo resembles, more than anything else, the finely cracked surface of a piece of pottery. For Tokyo, too, spread naturally and spontaneously, with no overall plan. Tokyo has also been almost completely destroyed a number of times. Earthquakes, then air raids. Each time, a new city was built on the scorched earth. Each time, the people of Tokyo joined together to clear away the rubble and start again as quickly as possible. In Europe, in total contrast, there was once a time when the fashion was actually to build ruins. This is Wimpole Gardens, on the outskirts of London. The ruins here may look like the work of centuries. In fact, they were built this way on purpose. From the mid-18th into the 19th century, ruins were the rage in Europe. The aristocratic and the wealthy, especially in Britain, loved to build gardens like this one, filled with mock ruins. From the windows of their stately homes, they enjoyed looking out upon these magnificent vistas of apparent antiquity. The favourite models for these man-made ruins were old English churches. Landscape architects competed with one another to show how skillfully they could recreate an ancient church in the full beauty of its decay. But why this great interest in decay and ruin?
This church is a ruin, albeit a mock ruin, but nevertheless it is a reminder of the historical continuity of the Church of England. What's important here, I think, is the sense of connection with the past. Continuity, after all, is what resists transience and the passing of time. All things must perish, but in Europe at least they leave something of themselves behind. Buildings of stone or brick may crumble or collapse, but parts will remain. The buildings lie in ruins, but ruins come to symbolize the faith, the worldview, the sensibilities behind them. These all stay alive. More important than what perishes is what lives on. So the idea is that all things must decay, and that the decayed is more beautiful than the new. The English like ruins. They preserve ruins for their own sake. The Japanese, on the other hand, take no interest in the old and decayed. All that's left of most old castles in Japan is a few of the foundation stones. No trace remains of the actual structure, generally made of wood or only faced with stone. Japan hardly has anything that might be called historical ruins. In this sense, the Japanese are entirely unlike Europeans. They feel that things must pass, that life itself is impermanent. Here in Europe, many old buildings remain fairly intact. There's a strong sense of continuity. In Japan, meanwhile, the old disappears practically overnight. So when the Japanese decide they want to preserve the past, they must build it again from scratch. The most typical example that comes to mind is Ise Shrine.
Removal and rebuilding work is now underway at Ise Shrine, near Osaka. The task is to rebuild the entire shrine, one of Japan's most revered. The work will take some 20 years. Today, the people are moving timber up the river to the site of the shrine. This particular log will not actually be used in the construction work until 5 years from now, in the autumn of 1993. This type of removal and reconstruction work has been going on continuously at Ise since the time of the Emperor Temmu in the mid-7th century. This is the site for the new shrine, a gravel lot next to the present shrine. The shrine will be rebuilt exactly as it was. However, the materials will be all new, and its position will be shifted slightly. Again, the custom is entirely different from Europe. There, ruins are treasured, and the original materials are preserved. Here, at Ise Shrine, everything is rebuilt from new materials. For in Japan, newness is next to godliness. In the Shibuya district of Tokyo, there is a street corner mural that is repainted every month. Each painting disappears after a month, to be replaced by another. The building's owner had the idea. He decided that constantly changing the mural would help bring a sense of freshness to the neighborhood. This is a new complex of buildings in the Hibiya district of Tokyo. Unlike Europe, with its sense of continuity, here, buildings seem to replace one another almost effortlessly. Arata Isozaki is a leading Japanese figure in the postmodernist school and one of the world's most renowned architects. Among Isozaki's recent designs is the Tsukuba Center building in the city of Tsukuba, north of Tokyo. In it, he experiments with a number of new uses of space. One of the models for his use of space is found in Italy. The Hill of Campidoglio in Rome. On this hilltop, there are buildings representing a wide span of Italian history. Architectural styles of 3 different periods coexist here. The Palace of Victor Emmanuel, built in chalkstone at the end of the 19th century. Next to it, a typical church of the Middle Ages. And up the steps, a collection of 16th century Renaissance buildings. All across Rome can be found buildings of various periods, providing a constant sense of the city's historical continuity. Isozaki has drawn freely upon European architectural history in an attempt to create entirely new urban environments for Japan. At the center of the Tsukuba Center building is an arrangement of rocks based on the motif of ancient ruins. Next to it is a large stone-paved plaza. Steps from the plaza lead to a Roman-style amphitheater. The amphitheater combines round pillars with the type of paving stones used in traditional Japanese landscape gardens. Here, Isozaki has attempted to join together a number of architectural traditions from Japan and the West. He has long been interested in combinations of fundamentally different types of architecture. Experiments such as these offer a glimpse of new possibilities for the urban landscape of Tokyo.
日本の都市ってのはみんなもうごちゃごちゃでダメだと言われている。言われてんだけども、これはそういうきちんと整理整頓されたロジックではないけれど、さまざまなイメージが重層して組み立っていくという。でそのまた逆に日本人の理解できる論理を考えれば案外それでみんな用を足していって面白い。例えば、ヨーロッパ行ってあるところに行こうと思うと街の中で道路の名前を聞いて番地を聞くと、そうすると自動的にそこにスーッとこう行けるわけです。でところが日本で東京で番地聞いても、誰もそこまで行き着かない。どこに行くかって言えばあそこにゴミ箱があってここに電信柱があってその角を曲がってですね右側に赤い家があるとその次だというような一つのイメージとイメージをですねどんどんつなぎ合わせていって街の中で一つのこう自分のこう行動範囲を系列を作っていきますね。それと同じことが都市デザインの上でも、言われている作り上げられている。そうすると一見ごちゃごちゃなんだけども我々はそれを独特の読み方をしながら生活しているということが言えますね。でその空間の形式というのは僕はヨーロッパ的なものじゃなくて非常に日本的な伝統の中にあったものだというふうに思うし、でそれがもしかすると非常に今日的な新しい、メディアが支配していく空間としては新しい形式なんじゃないだろうかというふうに思います。
The skyline of Tokyo is one of traditional tile roofs, dotted with buildings of all sizes. Ever since the Meiji Restoration, Tokyo has modelled itself after the great cities of Europe. And yet, Tokyo as a whole remains entirely unlike any European city. There may be little order or beauty to the shopping streets of Tokyo. But these streets are filled with life, with an undeniable human warmth. If Tokyo is ever to give birth to a new sense of beauty, it will almost surely come from this warmth.
When the Japanese build with wood, they create things of beauty. But when they work with stone, their buildings have a slightly rough quality. We seem to have difficulty creating beauty from stone. If, say, the people of Rome decided to imitate the Japanese style of wooden building, the effect would probably be a little rough as well. It's hard, I think, to make a city beautiful by trying to recreate some faraway place. Japan's economy today is doing well. We have both the economic means and a growing new aesthetic sense. Europe used to seem a very distant place, and now, for architects at least, it feels much closer. We can look at those same rocks more carefully now, I hope, and I think that the Tokyo of the future has the potential to become a surprisingly beautiful city.
Tokyo, a city changing with the times, often strikingly so. It is a city constantly rebuilding itself, looking not to the past, but always to the present. In that sense, it is a city like few others in the world. Tokyo is a vast metropolis, the result of many small parts constantly growing, rebuilding, renewing. What shape Tokyo will take tomorrow, only time will tell.